Hi everyone, it's Darcy. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing a full review of the NYU SPS publishing program. So I just completed my master's in this program, did it for 2 years, and overall really enjoyed it, but wanted to break it down because I've gotten lots of questions and DMs about it. So essentially the full title is that it is in NYU School of Professional Studies, and it is a master's in publishing, digital and print media. I have it pulled up on my phone, all the details, so I hopefully don't miss anything. Although I will say as a caveat, I think they are making some changes after I'm done. I think it's merging under something else in the School of Professional Studies. So this is just as of the time I was there. I'm sure there are going to be changes in the future. So overall, the publishing program is focused on book publishing and then digital/magazine publishing. So sort of 3 main areas, but some overlap between digital and magazine and just in general, but a lot of the book is different than digital and magazine media side. And so I found actually that there was more people on the book side. I would say 2/3 were on book and 1/3 was on the digital side. So there's definitely a few of us, but overall the program was really small. I think there was maybe around 25 of us graduating when I graduated. So very different experience compared to my undergrad, which I made a whole video talking about. So I'm gonna try not to overlap with too much with that video. But I did really like how small and niche the program was, and just very tailored to our interests. And I did go in thinking that I would maybe want to be a book editor, but quickly decided that wasn't for me. A little bit too much project management in that, and ended up focusing way more on digital because that's what I love anyway, and it just is a better fit for me. So I was really glad that the program was a combination of those to really help figure out what you want in that space and to really help hone those skills, because I think that's the main thing that I've gotten out of it, is to just really feel confident in my ability to work in all sorts of different realms of digital media. And while I don't technically work for a publishing company anymore, I still think it's really helping me in my career, which I'm gonna get into in a little bit. So people kind of get confused because I work for a tech company now, but I basically do publishing of media for this IT shop at this tech company. So it definitely still applies the skills. So I think that's where you are actually able to use the degree in a lot of different ways, even though lots of folks do just want to work for a traditional publisher through this degree. There's, I think, a lot of ways it can be applied, especially if you do focus on digital media. So I'm going to kind of break this down into a few different sections, talking about classes, professors, then the overall experience, and then sort of career stuff, if the money's worth it, and then doing a little Q&A section from I asked for questions on my Instagram, and I got a few of those, and I know I've had some others previously, so if there's any I don't address, definitely comment down below. I'm gonna try and do as much as I can. So the classes, you can concentrate in 3 different areas. There is media content development, media marketing, and media profitability. And I think most people focus on the content development because most people are interested in editorial kind of stuff, whether that's editing or creating the content. And that's obviously what I focused on. I didn't really know a ton of people who focus on marketing or profitability, but that's what floats your boat. That's an option too. And you are required to take classes in all 3 of those areas, but then could choose a lot of electives in your concentration. And then there are a few different classes that are required, but then you get to pick your electives in those areas. So you do have to take 4 core classes in the first semester, or I should say, if you're doing it part-time, this would be longer. So you can do the program full-time in 2 years, or you can take longer to do it, 3+ years if you are working full-time and want to do part-time. I, however, did my first full year full-time for grad school, and then was working full-time the second year, but then still taking a huge course load, but it was still technically part-time. It was 3 classes a week versus 4 the first year, so once a week evenings classes, all from 6:30 to 9, Monday through Thursday in the evening. And so you can work full-time and do part-time or full-time or however you want to do it, which is really nice to have that flexibility. You're always available during the day for work, for internship, what have you. So I personally really liked that structure. I could see if you're not an evening person that could be hard, but for me it worked for me well, even though I was working full-time that second year. So you can see all of this on the NYU SPS site, but essentially there are a few different core classes that you have to take in the beginning. You have to take Intro to Multimedia Financial Analysis, Intro to Book Publishing, Intro to Magazine Media, and Intro to Marketing and Branding. So those were what I took my first semester. A few others you have to take. You have to take Publishing and Law and Management and Leadership in Traditional Times. And in the end, your last semester, you have to take Capstone and Multimedia Financial Analysis 2. So those are kind of the main things, and then you have like a ton of electives to choose from, and it kind of depends on the semester, but I would say my favorite classes were, I did 2 quarter-long video editing classes, and that's like stuff I do every single day, so that was super helpful. And then I took a social media marketing class that I really liked, and then I learned a lot in the design classes that I took, even though that wasn't like as much my strong suit. And yeah, just anything like digital media related I learned a lot. And then I think actually my digital financials class really prepared me well for the capstone, so I would highly recommend that class. It wasn't actually something I use every single day, but I learned a lot in that class, and I honestly just learned a lot overall. I think some of the core requirements were maybe not my favorite, but I did really enjoy the capstone overall, which was a lot of work, but it was very fulfilling and worthwhile, and I picked something I was passionate about, so I did really enjoy the capstone. So overall it's a 36 credit course, which actually isn't that much, which is why I was still able to complete it even though I was technically not quite full-time my second year. So it's like a good amount, and it felt like just like the perfect amount to me, where at the end I think I had like gotten everything I was going to out of it, but it also like went by really fast and like didn't feel too long or too short. So I think it probably would depend if you did it more than 2 years and broke it out further, but for me I feel like the 2 years was good, and I was sad for it to be over, but it also felt like it was time. And I talked about this in my vlog some probably, but the capstone was like this big project we did our whole last semester, and it was basically like a comprehensive business proposal for a publishing and or digital media brand. So I focused on like a digital media brand and like a website and content development, and you have to like build out the whole business model, marketing, like finance, ops, like just the whole everything for a business, as well as like examples of editorial content. So it was just like a really good way to like bring everything together that we've worked on, which is why it's the capstone. And because classes are only once a week, they are like spaced out. You know, it's not like an undergrad when you have like the same class 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes even 4 or 5. So I feel like there's less fluff that way. It is very much like the classes, what you're doing in them are always for the most part worth your while, and the homework is like spaced out enough where you're not constantly doing homework. Even though you still have a lot of work outside of class, it's not like you have homework for 3 days out of the week. You have once a week homework, which is kind of nice, especially if you're busy like me doing a full-time job or something, as lots of people are. So I overall really liked the scheduling of everything, and I liked my classes, like I said. Another thing is that professors were great, and I think were a huge part of the experience because they're all adjuncts basically, and all like work in the industry and then just like teach this one class on the side. And so they are all very in touch with the industry and have like decades of experience usually that they can pass on to you, and give you career advice, and then also teach you the skills that they know you need to know because they're still in the industry. These aren't people who, you know, haven't been working in it for 20 years, because guess what, like 20 years so much has changed in publishing and digital media. So it's like so nice that these are people who are very in touch with what's going on, and then they're clearly like very passionate about teaching because they don't have to be doing this, you know. They have a full-time job. It's like they're doing it because they care, they genuinely want to help students, and you can really see that. And for the most part they're just like very kind people, very willing to help, and for the most part like aren't too harsh in terms of grading, maybe just a tad, but for the most part like if you're doing the work and you care, you're probably gonna do well, because again they're not like trying to make you fail. You're all just like there to learn from them, and yeah, it's good. It's really good. So I feel like especially if you are looking for a specific type of job afterwards. I know a lot of folks have like made connections through professors and gotten jobs that way. So that's definitely like a big part of the program and a big asset. On that thread, there also are industry events where they would have us like meet with different companies, which was really cool. However, we were kind of limited in that normally pre-COVID they would have been in person in offices to learn about companies and meet people. Ours were all on Zoom the entire 2 years that I was there because I did it all during the pandemic. So I can't really speak to that exactly, but it was still really cool to hear from these companies, but I don't think I necessarily got as much out of it that way because you didn't really form like one-on-one relationships or like, I don't know, kind of have a lot of opportunity for rapport because it was all on Zoom. So it was still really cool. Like my favorite was listening to The Atlantic, which is a publication I love, and there's definitely some other ones that were really cool as well. And so how different publishers come in, both on the book side and the media side, and we get to like submit questions and they tell us about what they do. So it's really cool to see like the back end of like how these companies run and be able to ask, you know, these people high up questions. And that's another thing I should add, is that all of the classes always had several guest speakers through the course of the class. So like usually for 14-week classes we would have like 3 guest speakers like per class. That's a lot of connections again, and these are some very well-known people in their industry, and so again you can like learn so much from them and, you know, make those connections. So I think that's a huge reason the program is what it is because of the people who are involved in it, being as high up as they are, as experienced as they are, and like being willing to share and help you in your career. Like they make the program what it is. Then I touched on this as well in my undergrad versus grad video, but the experience is very different because you're a grad student. It's very different from the undergrad experience that NYU kind of champions in lots of their marketing materials and the tours and all of that great stuff. But very different experience because you're not on the Washington Square campus. You're not all living in a dorm. You're adults. You have careers, and most of the people are living off campus wherever throughout the city. My first year, like partly elsewhere outside of New York because people were hybrid, people were on Zoom. And so yeah, just very different experience. And I've said this a million times, but if this is your first video that you're seeing of me, our actual buildings were in the financial district and Bryant Park in Midtown, and then one near Union Square, which was the closest to Washington Square. But most of the classes were in Finite and Midtown. They were not near Washington Square. So again, very different experience being in the School of Professional Studies. And I personally didn't mind it, but I could see if you like came in wanting that NYU Washington Square classic experience, being disappointed. So that's something that is different than I didn't necessarily expect. So something I get asked a lot, and partly why I wanted to make this video, is has it been worth it for my career? So I would say this is really going to vary person to person. However, and this kind of ties into my next point after this, talking about finances, but for me it has already been worth it, I think. I do think it helped me get the job that I currently have because I did get it between my first and second year, and they seemed very impressed that I was getting my master's. They were very supportive of it, which is why I was able to do both. And so I do feel like it's a leg up, especially now that bachelor's degree are more than norm in most white collar situations. So that's a very privileged statement to make, but in most white collar jobs they expect you to have a bachelor's. So nowadays like a master's is what's going to set you apart, unless it's required baseline for your job, such as being a lawyer or a doctor. Obviously you have to have post-grad education for that. But if it's not required, if you're in more of a business context, it does show that you're taking business, your career, all of that very seriously. You're again honing those skills that you can apply to your job, and it's worthwhile, I think, for if you have the means to do it, but it's not necessary. Like something you have to do. And so that leads me to another point I need to talk about, which is I get asked a lot, is it financially worth it? And I have a very hard time answering this because everyone is in a different situation. And I think you need to keep in mind something very important here. If you're going to publishing, you might not be making a lot of money, especially like earlier on in your career for, you know, a significant period of time. So, you know, you have to take that into account when thinking about if you want to spend the money on this degree, because you don't need this degree to get into the publishing industry. If you get this degree, it's not a guarantee you're going to get in the publishing industry. It's going to help you make a lot of connections that can. However, like, it's not a golden ticket and it's a lot of money. So I would say there's other ways in, there's lots of other ways in, you know, working your way up the ladder. It's just hard and competitive to get into the industry, but there are so many different routes you can go. If you want to be an editorial, you can start somewhere else in the business and move your way to editorial. You can do like what I'm doing, working for a different type of company and doing the same type of thing. There's a lot of different opportunities. So I think it depends on where you're at. So I'm in a very privileged situation that I was able to do it and have the means to do it, and so that's where I can't speak for someone who might not have that experience, but I do think it's probably going to help me with my career in the long term, because you should be getting paid a higher salary if you have a master's. So hopefully that like will have financial, you know, rewards in the future, now that I do have it. But knock on wood, but in theory, like a master's should help you with that. However, if you're working like a low 5-figure job in publishing, still not going to make that much of a difference. So I think you do really need to consider that, versus when you're a doctor and you're going into debt, you know you're going to be making a lot of money in the long term. So all things to think about. However, I will say the publishing program has a ton of scholarships, and they're really easy to apply for and get. I got several throughout like the course of the program, and so I'm sure that there are some that I would hope that there are some that cover it fully. Mine didn't, but still like great that there are so many options for scholarships. So yeah, that can help, as well as financial aid, of course, and loans and all of that stuff. But it doesn't mean that it's not cheap. It is very expensive and not affordable, which I think is a larger issue with the whole college education system, and this video is already too long to go into that. But I do think it really just depends on your situation, and you don't need a master's and you don't need this to get into the publishing industry. However, it is a nice asset if you have the means. So I think that's kind of the main thing I want to say about that. And then one last thing I just wanted to add before I get into the questions I got is that it was actually a really interesting time to do this program. So, you know, take that into consideration, where it was a very unique experience, because the first year we were hybrid, and the second year we were in person but masked, and guests couldn't come in. We couldn't do industry visits. So I would imagine it's even better if you don't do it during a global pandemic. However, it was a really interesting time to do it because of how much the industry was rapidly changing. We got to constantly observe that, constantly talk about it. Not to say it wouldn't be interesting if the industry wasn't rapidly changing, but I wouldn't necessarily like use that as like a factor to decide if you should do it, but it's just something interesting to think about. Okay, so I got some questions from my Instagram. How much was related to assessing the quality and potential of manuscripts? So I think this is like talking about book editing. If you take classes related to book editing, this is like a huge part of that, which I did take one book editing class, and that was what made me decide that it wasn't for me. But if you're very into that, like that's what the class was. And there's also an advanced level of that. There's like several different editorial classes in general, I think, which I didn't take all of those because I did journalism in undergrad, so I didn't necessarily feel like I wanted to spend my time doing those. I wanted to spend my time doing things I wasn't as good at. Not that I'm like that good at it, but I'd already taken classes on some of that. But if you're new to editorial, there's like a lot of, you know, ways that you can kind of learn how to assess the quality and potential of manuscripts, or whatever type of digital content or content in general you're interested in. A huge part of the program. Let's see, talk about core electives, exams. How is it different from undergrad? So I think undergrad video I talked about, and then core electives I talked about, but exams, I didn't talk about exams. There was very few exams, which I love. Most of it was project-based and presentation-based. Did not miss having exams. The only classes that had exams were the financial classes, I believe, particularly the first one, and then the second one maybe had like a couple quizzes, but almost everything was project-based, because that's how like the real world is. This is a professional program, right? It doesn't make sense to have exams. Personally, I don't even think it should have grades. But I know that's not the way the education system in the US is structured, so they have to have grades to measure things, blah, blah, blah. But it's very much like not a grade heavy type of situation. There's like 20% participation for every single class, and like I'm pretty sure I always got that. Like it's not that hard to get, and you know, so it's just most of it is broken up into a few projects throughout the course, and that makes up the most of your grade. But most classes don't even have exams. And then a question about what does it mean by professional study Studies program. I think it essentially means like it's different from an academic program where you focus on more like theory-based stuff. This is more like the actual skills. Like we were always like in actual software you use at a company, and learning very much like industry trends, industry jargon, kind of learning from these professionals in the space versus, you know, it'd be very different if you were learning about like, I don't know, somehow the theory of like books or publishing or whatever. Like much different setup if you're like studying it in a humanities context versus this is in the School of Professional Studies. Like always everything in that school is much more career focused. Like there's stuff that's like focused on real estate and marketing and sports management, like stuff like that, you know. And then I have a question about international students, and I do get this question a lot, but I never really feel qualified to say it because I'm not an international student. So I will say though that there are like a good amount of international students in this program, and so I know it's definitely possible. There's lots of international students at NYU in general, again, so it's very possible. I do not know the ins and outs of that, but you can always contact admissions if you have questions, or maybe find someone who is an international student to talk to them. Yeah, so that's what I can say about that. But I think those are all the questions I'm gonna answer, and comment down below if there's anything else I missed, but hopefully this answers most of your questions. And that's gonna be a wrap on my NYU content for the most part. Like life is moving forward, new chapter, which feels very weird because I've made content about NYU for years now, and it's a super important chapter in my life, but also like I'm pretty burnt out on the NYU content. I think I've milked it for all it's worth, and I have so many videos, so if you have other questions not related to this specific topic, I probably have talked about it. So check out my NYU playlist, and yeah, subscribe if you're not already, and I'll see you all next time. Got my New Yorker Nowhere shirt on.